If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? I think that's the question that we are all collectively asking ourselves now that it is February 10th of 2026 and we are in, I think, either the second or the third big release of the Epstein files. But I wanted to talk about this today, hopefully in a way that no one else is covering it online. If you're looking for actual legitimate information or like specifics about the Epstein files, I think CoffeeZilla on his second channel, Voidzilla, and Asmongold has been doing a really good job getting into the actual details of the Epstein files. But what I more so want to talk about in this video is the significance of the Epstein files, whose fault it is, and what can be done. And I just kind of want to zoom out and kind of talk about this at like a conceptual level. And I hopefully don't want to give this a political slant or anything like that. I just want to talk about kind of like the societal and cultural implications that I see with the Epstein files. So let's go into the first topic, which is why I think the Epstein files are important. And this is kind of a trick topic here because really my point with this is that I really don't think that the Epstein files is important, and you might be shocked to hear that, but I'm going to explain why I don't think the Epstein files are important. And the reason that I don't think that they are important is because if nothing happens with the release of the files and there is no action or consequence taken, then does this really matter? Again, to refer back to the opening statement that I made with this video, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make the sound? Does it make a sound? This is the philosophical question that's being asked here, and I think that this applies to the Epstein files because if we're not seeing a meaningful change within our government as a result of the information that we're now aware of as a result of the files, then what really is the significance of it? That's really the main question that I have. And we've seen the government's reaction to the files, how they've handled the files, how Trump responded even to any questions about Jeffrey Epstein specifically.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
And I think that it's really hard to come away from all of the things that we've seen played out, and it's really hard to come away with any other conclusion other than the fact that they're both in on it. And by both I mean Democrats and Republicans, and I guess this goes into the second topic of this video, which is whose fault it is. And a lot of discussions online and even the government narrative around Jeffrey Epstein, there's a lot of really blaming the other side, and I think this is entirely counterproductive because this is no longer really a question of whose political party is involved in this. I think there's been evidence to show that, regardless of political party, many of these people were in Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle, or even at worst knew exactly what he was doing and either partook in the services that he was offering, and that's really painting it in the most generous way that I can, or they were in close enough proximity to it that they were aware, but kind of just, it was an inside joke for them. And that's really the crazy part about all of this, I think, is the implications of the people in power and the systems that they have to get away with things that no other person would be able to get away with. And that's really why I think that any conversation about blaming Republicans or Democrats, not only is it counterproductive, but it just reeks of using this as a political tool rather than actually caring about the focal issue of the files, which is, the questions of whether these people in positions of power are compromised, whether this was a honeypot operation, or whether government secrets or countries' secrets were divulged as a result of being in proximity with Epstein. I think there was a story that just broke out where, I believe it was Prince Andrew was leaking information to Jeffrey Epstein, financial information, which would lead to, huge investments and the ability to make enormous amounts of money. And that's really, I think, the main concern with what is going on, other than obviously, punishing criminals for these heinous and insane crimes. Obviously, I think that goes without saying. That's the main motivator to get to the bottom of this, is to, exact justice and to hold people accountable. But on the other hand of it, the second part is to just show the inner workings of the political and ruling class, or the rich and the wealthy. The emails that were exposed in all of this, and the amount of interconnectedness that all of these people had, it's really mind-blowing to see all of this. But really what I'm trying to get at here is that it has never been more obvious that it is really a matter of class warfare. This isn't a question of whether this is Republicans versus Democrats, at least specifically with this Epstein, with the Epstein files. Anyone who is trying to engage and try to make this a political battle of left versus right, I think there are disingenuous motivations behind that. That's really the point that I'm trying to make with saying all of this. And as citizens, I think that, in my opinion, this is the time to, keep your eye on the ball, and to hopefully not get distracted with any conversation about trying to, scapegoat it onto the other political party. That's really the main reason why I wanted to address that specific point, because I think that I see a lot of that happening, and I think that it's counterproductive, and worse, it dilutes the conversation, because rather than getting to the bottom of the Epstein files, or even launching an investigation, which the government has yet to do, the conversation has just been going back and forth about which political party is responsible. And I think that's the goal of that point in the conversation. I think it's also important to remember that the same system that allowed this to happen is also being used to bring it down. We owe great credit, I think, to politicians such as Ro Khanna, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nancy Mace, and I know I'm forgetting other politicians that were involved with releasing the files, but I think in all this craziness, it's easy to forget that, this same system that everyone is criticizing is also being used in the correct way to solve this issue. But this is only one part of the solution, I think. To use an example, I really look at this as the politicians that helped with getting the Epstein files exposed. They are passing the baton theoretically to us as citizens, and that leads us to the last topic of the video, which is what I think can be done with the Epstein files. And as I had said earlier, what will give meaning to the Epstein files is if there are actual consequences to what is going on. And as I had also stated earlier, I don't think, the government, at least as of right now, will be the means through which we can kind of exact this justice. And a lot of people are very either discouraged, frustrated, or have completely given up because of this reality that we're currently in. And, I completely understand that. I think it's honestly a very hard time to remain positive about all this. But what I will say is that the thing that really gives me a silver lining is the fact that, we are in a crucial point now, and we have the ability to use this information and to make a change more so than we ever have before. As I think that we are in a position now where we are seeing the government kind of play their hand. Um, we're in the age of information, and with all this information that has come out, the question is, what do we choose to do with it? Um, that is really the important question, and I think the important task that we are pretty much living through right now. Whether we like it or not, this is the reality that all of us are faced with. It's almost as if, we're at a poker table and all of the chips are pushed up right now, and we're holding the cards, and we have to make a decision if we're going to go all in as well. That's how at least I feel about all of this, as far as, me as a voter and as an American citizen. I'm really looking towards the future elections and seeing what candidates will come out. You look at people talking about all of this, and I want to cite Nick Fuentes because, he brought up the idea of not voting and staying at home. And he brought up his reasoning, which was, if we're not seeing someone who is representing us out in the public, then why vote for them? And I think that's really a fair strategy here, because I think this is, basic supply and demand. And maybe someone in the comments can correct me if I'm looking at this the wrong way, but I see this as merely supply and demand. What he is saying is that if we do not see someone who represents our values, then why vote for them? And I think that's a really good strategy, because I think, at the end of the day, people operate on incentives, and most politicians will do what will get them votes. So if they see that, if people see, excuse me, that there is a strong consensus for this in the public, we will see more people run on these platforms. And I want to cite the potential Florida Governor James Fishback as an example of what I think I'm describing here, where he is a very extreme candidate. And when I mean extreme, I don't necessarily mean good or bad. I just mean compared to other candidates who have historically run in, the governor's race. I think he's a really huge outlier in the way that he has gone about marketing himself online, the way he has gone about, talking about specific issues like the OnlyFans girl tax, specifically, that he had brought up, that went extremely viral. I mean, he is an example of what I'm talking about, where I think he's trying to represent these growing sentiments in the public. And the same way that he rose to meet these people, I think the same thing can happen as a result of these Epstein files. All of the corruption and all of the bad shit that people in government have been doing for a long time. This is now out in the open, and going back to that baton example with Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, it is up to us as the public to respond to that. And that's really what I want to address here in this whole topic of, what can be done about the Epstein files. Is there has to be some kind of ownership here on the general public, as well as, we are the main mechanism that puts some of these people into office. We vote for these people. We give them power and authority, and I think with that comes, some sense of ownership here. And I don't necessarily, don't want to be like overbearing or say like it's entirely the fault of the citizens. That would be, crazy. But I think to remove like all responsibility from, the public and the things that we award as a society, I think that's also counterproductive. I think there has to be some kind of conversation and some kind of accountability given to, just our attention as citizens and where we give it. I think there's an argument for even that complacency breeds this kind of stuff to happen. And that's really why I want to talk about it, is because I think that this is another thing that needs to be at least talked about in some way or addressed, hopefully by someone that can kind of make more sense of it than I can. But, even with my limited understanding, I think that there's something tangible there. When you look at society, it's like all the things that we have been rewarding in society, it has just really gotten us, um, you know, it hasn't really gotten us to a better place, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, if you like the video, please consider leaving a comment, whether you agree or disagree, because I think that more than anything, it's just important to have a place to kind of talk about all the crazy shit that's going on. So that's what I hope to kind of provide here. But yep, please take care and be safe out there.